There's a version of him that only shows up when he thinks you're not watching, not the confident one, not the one who plays it cool in front of his friends or takes 2 hours to text back because he doesn't want to seem too eager. I'm talking about the version of him that checks his phone 40 times a day hoping it's you, that replays a 5-minute conversation you had 3 weeks ago, that notices when you change your hair or your energy or your tone of voice and says nothing about it, but absolutely clocks it. That version of him exists, and most women never get to see it directly because he's not going to announce it. He's not going to sit you down and say, "I am emotionally attached to you and I'm scared of what that means." Men are rarely taught the language for that. What they are taught, consciously or not, is that vulnerability is risk, and risk is something you manage quietly, not something you broadcast. So today we're going to break down the real, researched, psychologically grounded signs that a man is emotionally attached to you, even when his behavior on the surface says the opposite. And by the end of this, you are going to be able to look at the last few weeks of your relationship or situationship and see it completely differently. Let's start with why this is so confusing in the first place, because I think this is the part nobody actually explains. You've probably had a version of this thought before. He acts distant, but then he does something that makes absolutely no sense if he doesn't care. He goes quiet for 2 days, and you start telling yourself the story that he's losing interest, that he's already halfway out the door, that you read too much into the whole thing. And then, out of nowhere, he sends a message that could only come from someone who has been thinking about you the entire time he was silent. He remembers something you mentioned in passing weeks ago. He shows up in a small, specific way that a person who didn't care would never bother to show up in. And your brain short circuits because it doesn't fit the story you were building. Here is the truth underneath all of that confusion. Attachment and vulnerability are not the same thing. A person can be deeply attached to you while being almost entirely unable to show you that attachment directly. And when it comes to men specifically, this gap between what they feel and what they're willing to reveal is often enormous, not because they don't care, but because most of them were never given a framework for expressing care that didn't feel like exposure. Think about how boys are raised, generally speaking. Emotional expression, especially around longing, fear of loss, or need for closeness, is quietly discouraged from a young age, not always through direct punishment, but through subtler mechanisms. A boy who cries is told to toughen up. A boy who expresses that he misses someone is teased. A boy who admits he's scared of being left is treated as fragile in a way that doesn't earn him respect from his peers. So he learns, cell by cell, that the safest way to survive emotionally is to keep the tender stuff hidden and let the behavior speak instead. By the time that boy becomes a grown man standing in a relationship with you, he has spent 2, 3, 4 decades building a nervous system that translates attachment into action rather than language. This is not an excuse, it's a mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, you stop needing him to say the words in order to trust what's actually happening. So let's go through the first real sign, and it's one of the most reliable ones there is. He remembers things you didn't think mattered. Not your birthday, not your favorite color. I mean the small, almost throwaway details. You mentioned once that you don't like when people chew loudly. You mentioned once, in passing, that a certain song reminds you of your childhood. Weeks later, he brings it up, unprompted, in a context that has nothing to do with the original conversation. This is not a coincidence, and it's not a performance, because performing attachment for effect usually looks the opposite of subtle. It looks big, obvious, designed to be noticed. What you're looking at instead is called incidental encoding, which is a fancy way of saying that his brain is storing information about you automatically, without him deciding to. Human memory does not do this for people we're indifferent to. We forget most conversations within hours. But when someone is emotionally significant to us, our brain tags information related to them as important and files it away without our permission. He's not trying to remember these things about you. He simply can't help it. That's attachment operating below the level of conscious choice, and it is one of the most honest signals a person can give you, precisely because it isn't something he can fake or control. The second sign is closely related but harder to spot, because on the surface it can look like the opposite of interest. He gets quiet around you, not cold, quiet. There's a difference, and it matters enormously. Coldness has an edge to it. It's dismissive, short, sometimes irritated. Quietness born of attachment feels different. It feels like someone trying to regulate themselves in your presence, like there's more going on internally than what's showing up externally. This connects to something attachment researchers call co-regulation, which is the process by which our nervous systems calibrate to the people we feel safest and most exposed around. When a man is deeply comfortable and deeply affected by someone at the same time, his body sometimes responds by slowing down, by needing fewer words, by simply being present rather than performing conversation. If you've ever noticed him watching you do something completely mundane, unwrapping food, scrolling your phone, laughing at something on your own, with an expression that's hard to name but clearly isn't boredom, that's what this looks like from the outside. It is one of the most misread signals in relationships, because our culture has trained us to associate love with talking, with declarations, with constant verbal reassurance. But there's a whole category of men whose attachment shows up as stillness. And if you're only trained to recognize love that's loud, you will walk straight past love that's quiet. But here's the sign that almost nobody talks about, and it's arguably the most important one on this entire list, because it's the one most likely to get misread as the opposite of what it actually is. He pulls away right after a moment of real closeness. You have a conversation that goes somewhere deeper than usual. Maybe you're vulnerable with him. Maybe he's vulnerable with you. Maybe there's just a moment where the wall between you thins out more than it normally does. And then, in the days that follow, he goes distant. Fewer texts, slower responses, a strange sense that he's stepped back exactly when you thought you were stepping forward together. This is where most women make the single most costly interpretation error in the entire dynamic, because the intuitive read is that the closeness scared him away, that he realized he didn't want this after all, that the vulnerability revealed something that made him lose interest. In a huge number of cases, the opposite is true. What's actually happening is a nervous system response, not a decision. For people with avoidant attachment patterns, which are extremely common and not exclusive to men, but disproportionately reinforced in male socialization, closeness activates a kind of internal alarm. Not because the closeness is unwanted, but because closeness equals exposure, and exposure equals the possibility of being hurt in a way that feels unbearable, precisely because the person now matters enough to cause real damage if things go wrong. So his body does what avoidant nervous systems do. It creates a distance to regulate the intensity of what just happened. This is not him deciding you don't matter. This is frequently the exact opposite. It's the felt sense of mattering too much, hitting a system that never learned how to hold that feeling without protecting itself. This is exactly why so many women misread this stage and walk away right when it actually mattered most, because they interpret the withdrawal as proof of disinterest instead of proof of impact. Let's talk about what happens when this pattern goes unrecognized, because the stakes here are genuinely high. Relationships built between an anxious partner who feels the withdrawal and immediately assumes it means the connection is ending, and an avoidant partner who withdraws specifically because the connection is intensifying, tend to collapse in a very particular and very avoidable way. The anxious partner, feeling the distance, escalates. More texts, more requests for reassurance, more direct confrontation about where things stand. And to the avoidant partner, this escalation feels like exactly the kind of engulfment his nervous system was trying to prevent in the first place. So he withdraws further, which then confirms the anxious partner's fear, which then causes more escalation. This is not a failure of compatibility. It's a feedback loop that neither person actually wants, built entirely out of two nervous systems responding to each other's protection mechanisms, as though they were disinterest. Countless relationships that could have worked have ended in exactly this loop, at exactly the moment when the deeper attachment was actually forming, simply because neither person had the language to name what was happening while it was happening. So here's what to actually do with this information, because understanding the pattern only matters if it changes your behavior. First, when you notice the withdrawal after closeness pattern specifically, resist the urge to immediately escalate. Give it a few days of normal low-pressure contact rather than confrontation. Not silence, not punishment, just normal warmth without demand. This gives his nervous system room to recalibrate without triggering the exact defensive response you're trying to avoid. Second, if the pattern repeats across multiple instances of closeness, there is one direct question worth asking, not accusingly, but with real curiosity. I notice you tend to go quiet after we get close, and I'm not upset about it. I'm just curious what that's about for you. This single sentence does something powerful. It names the pattern without blame, and it gives him an opening to explain something he may have never had language for before, because most men with this pattern have never had a partner name it accurately instead of reacting to it emotionally. Third, watch for the return. Avoidant withdrawal that stems from genuine attachment almost always self-corrects within days to about 2 weeks without you needing to chase it. If the distance stretches well beyond that with no re-engagement at all, that's a different signal entirely. And it's worth trusting that too. There are 2 more signs worth walking through in detail because they show up in almost every attached man's behavior, and they're consistently misread in opposite directions. The first is that he asks questions that circle back to earlier conversations, sometimes days or weeks later, in a way that reveals he's been turning something over in his mind long after the conversation ended. If you mentioned a worry about your job and he brings it up again unprompted a week later to ask how it resolved, that is not small talk. That is someone whose mind kept returning to something that mattered to you without any external prompt to do so. Most people, even in genuinely friendly interactions, do not retain and revisit information this way unless the person it concerns has taken up real space in their thinking. This kind of follow-up is one of the clearest markers of ongoing emotional investment, precisely because it requires effort across time, not just attentiveness in the moment. The second sign is that he shows a kind of protectiveness that has nothing to do with possessiveness or control, and it's important to distinguish the two clearly, because they can look superficially similar from the outside. Protectiveness, born of attachment, shows up as him noticing when you seem tired, stressed, or upset before you've said anything about it, and adjusting his own behavior accordingly, softening his tone, offering to help with something practical, simply being more present without making a production out of it. This is different from jealousy or controlling behavior, which is typically about restricting your autonomy or reacting to perceived threats to his own position rather than responding to your actual emotional state. Attachment-driven protectiveness is attuned outward toward your well-being. Controlling behavior is oriented inward toward managing his own insecurity. Learning to tell these apart matters enormously because one is a sign of healthy investment and the other is a warning sign that deserves real attention rather than romanticizing. I want to spend a moment on something that complicates all of this, because I think it's important to be honest about the limits of any single sign in isolation. No individual behavior on this list should be treated as absolute proof of attachment on its own, and no single instance of distance should be treated as absolute proof of disinterest either. What actually matters is the pattern across time, not any one data point. A man who remembers small details about you once might simply have a good memory. A man who does this consistently across weeks and months, specific to you and not obviously to other people in his life, is showing you something real. Similarly, one period of withdrawal after closeness could have a dozen mundane explanations: work stress, family obligations, something entirely unrelated to you. It's the repeated pattern, closeness followed reliably by retreat, followed reliably by return, that constitutes meaningful evidence of the attachment-withdrawal cycle we've been describing, rather than a single instance of someone being briefly distant. This is also a good moment to address something that comes up constantly in this conversation, which is the question of how long you should reasonably wait for someone to become more expressive about attachment they clearly feel but rarely state. There is no universal timeline here, because it depends heavily on someone's individual history, and how deeply the pattern of hiding vulnerability was reinforced over the course of their life. But there is a useful distinction between someone who is slowly, gradually becoming more expressive over time, even in small increments, and someone whose behavior has plateaued entirely, showing the same guarded signals month after month with no movement whatsoever, even as trust and history accumulate. The first pattern suggests someone actively working, even if slowly, against a deeply conditioned habit. The second suggests either a much deeper block that may need more direct conversation or professional support to shift, or in some cases a genuine mismatch that no amount of patient waiting is going to resolve. Paying attention to the trajectory rather than just the current state gives you real information about which of these you're dealing with. It's also worth naming honestly that recognizing these signs does not obligate you to wait indefinitely for someone to become more verbally expressive, even if the underlying attachment is completely genuine. You are allowed to want and need direct verbal reassurance in a relationship, even if you understand exactly why a partner struggles to provide it. Understanding the psychology behind someone's guardedness is not the same thing as deciding that your own needs for clearer communication are unreasonable. The healthiest version of this dynamic involves both things being true at once. You can extend genuine understanding for why someone expresses attachment through action rather than words, while also being honest with them and with yourself about how much of that quieter language you're able to sustainably live on before it starts to feel like something is missing for you. The core thing I want you to walk away with is this. Emotional attachment in men is frequently expressed through action, memory, stillness, and even distance, rather than through declaration. That doesn't make it less real. It makes it a different dialect of the same language, one that most of us were never taught to read because we were taught to listen for words instead of behavior. Once you learn to read the behavior, an enormous amount of confusion simply disappears and you start being able to tell the difference between someone pulling away because it's ending and someone pulling away because it's becoming real. And once you can tell that difference reliably across the pattern rather than any single moment, you stop needing him to translate his own attachment into your language because you've learned to read it fluently in his. One last thing worth naming before we close this out, because I think it reframes the whole conversation in a useful way. Learning to read attachment through action instead of only through words is not just a skill for understanding him better. It's also a skill that protects you from a specific kind of self-doubt that tends to creep in during the quiet, undramatic stretches of a relationship. The stretches where nothing is going wrong, but nothing feels particularly reassuring either. Without this framework, those quiet stretches can start to feel like evidence that something is fading, simply because they're not generating the reassurance you're used to needing. With this framework, you can hold those same quiet stretches far more calmly because you know what to actually look for, and you know that the absence of a constant verbal affirmation is not the same thing as the absence of genuine feeling underneath it. Next week, we're doing the flip side of this exact conversation, the 6 signs that you are the one avoiding attachment, even when you think you're the one who wants closeness the most. If any part of what I described today made you think of your own behavior as much as his, that video is for you, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.